A warm welcome back. I had the pleasure of connecting with quite a number of you during my recent masterclass. It was a free class where I shared the 5 essential lessons that I have learned through my 28 years of marriage. And while it wasn't part of the title, that certainly also includes through my years and years of coaching other couples. And there was something that arose in one of the questions that I thought deserved its own podcast episode. So if you were there, I hope you enjoy hearing me revisit this tender, poignant, and super important topic. And if you weren't there, I hope you'll join me for a future masterclass or join my Facebook group. It's called Intimate Marriage. It's on Facebook. It's free to join, and I engage directly. In case you have specific questions, you can ask them there. And if this is your first time listening to the Intimate Marriage podcast, I want to give you a really warm welcome. My goal is to really provide enough content over all of the episodes that you have a place to put your attention if you are in a marriage, a long-term committed relationship, and you want to know how to feel more joy, more closeness and connection with your partner, more pleasure, more erotic nourishment and gratification. If you want to know how to create a really fulfilling relationship, well, each episode has one answer to the question about how to create that. And in this episode, I want to focus on starting where you are, because this is one of the things that came up in this free masterclass I did, where it was a man who was asking, he and his wife just adore one another. They are deep in partnership together. And actually, before they got married, he referenced this during the masterclass, so I'm going to here too, and I know I have their permission to talk about it. They really wanted to be together. They didn't want to separate. They didn't want to find someone else. I don't think either of them thought someone else would be any better. But because they both come from divorced families and very complicated relationships between the parents, and they didn't have friends or colleagues who had relationships that were particularly inspiring, it's like they didn't want to commit to marriage and then end up having a relationship that really didn't work for them. So they chose to coach with me, private coaching on this very topic. And it really was such a beautiful experience. And they happily got engaged and had this really magnificent, very meaningful wedding and commenced a journey with infertility, which is so common and brings up so many different challenges. So they now have fabulous twins, and in the process haven't found their way to connect or reconnect to the erotic vitality in their relationship. It was very present, but then they commenced lots and lots of functional sex, the kind of sex that is timed to ovulation, that is meant for a purpose other than pleasure, connection, relishing in one's own and one's partner's body. And while the way this unfolds during the infertility journey has particular flavors, some fairly universal, some unique to the particular couple, this notion of dutiful functional sex can arise in any context of the relationship where you're having sex because you're supposed to, whether it's because you're supposed to be a good wife or a good husband, it's what a good couple does, it's what your religion teaches you to do, or it's because you are really timing things to conceive. And either way, whatever the driving force is, the sex is functional. It's getting the job done and not focused on the deliciousness available as you and your partner explore and receive and give varying ways of touching one another that can feel so delicious and really fulfilling. So if you're in a situation where the sex is not really happening, or it's happening in what I describe as functional ways, as opposed to pleasure-driven, erotic, energy-driven, ecstasy-driven. And you want to change that. Most likely, you're not going to change that by exploring new positions, getting a new lube with a flavor, or introducing a new sex toy. I'm not against any of those things, but that's not likely to be your next move when your sex is not happening, or it's mostly functional, or there's been some kind of really intense experience, whether it's been the infertility journey or there's been a loss of some kind. And by loss, yes, I mean the death, the passing of someone important to you, but it also can mean the loss of a job, being laid off for a long time, when that kind of undoes you. There are lots of different contexts in which disconnection happens that can naturally arise from an intrinsic cause in the relationship, or it can be the natural consequence of relatively external circumstances. So if you relate to what I'm talking about, whatever the circumstance is, even if you're not really sure whether it's more intrinsic or extrinsic, that's not important right now. What's important is that you feel stuck, that you want more connection, more joy, more yumminess, and you feel stuck and maybe resentful, maybe blaming, maybe just plain stuck. If that's the situation, then I invite you to find the next step that is within your range. In other words, if you're running marathons regularly, well, go for a triathlon. Why not? But if you're in more of the couch potato phase of things, then your first goal is just to get your sneakers, put them on your feet, and walk to your door. And that is enough for the first move when you're getting off the couch and wanting to run a 5K, for example. So those are metaphors. Quite frankly, ever since high school English, I feel a little confused if it's a metaphor, a simile, an analogy, but whatever. That is an image. And let's make it more concrete, related to sex. So you may be having sex, but you haven't felt your heart's opening. You haven't felt that kind of feeling where afterwards it's made all the difference that you've just made love with one another. If that's not happening, it may be that just lying in bed together naked in an embrace is where you start. You just feel one another without any goal of anything more than just being in that embrace naked together. And that might be too much for where you are right now. Perhaps you start by just looking in one another's eyes and being present with one another, slowing down to drink in eye gazing without concerns about whatever it is that's going on in your life that has fostered the disconnection. No, you're just being there with one another. Maybe the next move is that you sit on the couch together, side by side, holding hands with your wedding song playing. Maybe the next step is that you take turns just gently exploring and touching. You might rub the tips of your fingers gently on your partner's face, and either with clothes on or without, just caress them, starting at the head, which is often a less confronting area to touch, and moving down the shoulders, maybe just down the back and along the hips and down to the feet. Or maybe you embrace one another for at least 30 seconds in order to feel connected. Like, it's very easy if you are looking at, magazines at the checkout counter, or reading books like Come As You Are or She Comes First or any of these books about how to have great sex or Woman's Anatomy of Arousal. Like those are all really great resources, but not if what you want to do or what you need to do is focus on basic addition and subtraction. It may be in other areas of life, you absolutely are ready for calculus, but the only way to get to calculus is to start with basic addition and subtraction. And the thing I really want to emphasize, especially if you've been through an infertility journey or there's been some kind of a loss or unemployment, whatever it is, if you previously had a robust, healthy, satisfying sex life, and then you've been through this phase of minimal sex or functional sex, and all these other things have been happening in your life, or at least one of your lives, so it's impacted both of you, then during that time, you have both become different people. There are parts of yourselves which you didn't know before, which have come into being and taken root and blossomed, and other parts of you which have atrophied and fallen away. And so let's just say it is the situation with infertility and it's been 4 years. Well, when you go to be ravished, to make love, you're not the same person you were 4 years ago or 10 years ago. If it's that just having young children has been challenging and now they're, 10 and 8 and you want to find yourselves again. Or maybe things were really luscious between the two of you and you've been through the process of saying goodbye to your children because you've become empty nesters. Like whatever it is that has been happening, who you are now is not the same as you were before. And so the reason to start in these very gentle, poignant, tender ways that can feel like so beneath you because you're married, but also can bring relaxation and ease because you can connect in a way that's calibrated. The reason to start slow enough that you both can be a yes is because that's what it takes to integrate who you were and who you've become and bring all of yourselves to one another. Because once you're doing that, well, that is the basic principle of uncompromising intimacy, which is my method that I teach for how to really open up and enjoy yourself and one another in all elements of intimacy. But sometimes we do have to slow down enough to kind of scoop up the part of us that hasn't been included in how we touch one another and how we express our love for one another. But that is who you are. So you need to go back and scoop that part of you up and gently, in a calibrated manner, integrate those parts of yourselves. So this is definitely a complex, nuanced idea. It's not some soundbite. It's not some quickie thing, but it works. So dial down enough to where you're both able to say yes. And maybe that's like pretending that you are in middle school and shyly flirting with one another. Maybe you actually do a role play where you meet in a bar as though it's the first time. One of you is sitting at the bar and the other one comes in and picks you up. Like, there's so many different ways to allow more of you to be in the intimate parts of your relationship. And if there are parts of you that you don't know how to include, well, that's the place to put your attention on. And invariably the answer is to slow down, breathe, do less, and just go back to as early a format for connecting as you can both say yes to. And if you do that, you will find yourselves catching up in a wholesome, robust, integrated way, actually much faster than if you try to force something or more likely just stay stuck. So if this speaks to you and you want to take more of these steps, be sure to read my book, Uncompromising Intimacy. It is easy to implement, and so many people tell me how just reading the book has changed their lives. It gives you a way to think about your interactions with your spouse, and it empowers you with very particular tools to be able to connect with one another in meaningful ways. So the book focuses more on emotional intimacy and vulnerably revealing the truth of who you are in a way that feels good and is your style, whatever that is. And what I'm saying is similarly, what I've talked about today is really an invitation to let the part of your soul and body connect with your partner's soul and body in a way that starts with both of you being comfortable. We're not talking about jumping in at the deep end. We're talking about dipping your toes in the kiddie pool, not because you are kids, but because you are courageous and want to swim magnificently in the deep end. And the way to start is to go back to dipping your toes in and progress from there.